Welcome back to another episode of Egil Saga. Onund Shoni was living at Annabrekka when Egil lived at a borg. His wife was Thorgerd, the daughter of Bjarni the Stout from Snefellstrund. Their children were Steinar and Dalla, who married Ogmund Galtason, and had two sons named Thorgils and Cormac. When Onund grew old and began to go blind, he handed over his farm to his son Steinar. The two of them were very wealthy. Steinar was exceedingly large and strong, an ugly man, stooping with long legs but a short trunk. He was a great troublemaker, overbearing, difficult to deal with and ruthless, and very quarrelsome. When Egil's son Thorstein was living at Borg, he and Steinar did not get along. South of the Hafsleik brook is a marsh called Stakmiri, which is submerged in winter, but in spring, when the ice is thawed, it is such good pasture for cows that it was considered worth a whole haystack. Hafsleik had marked the boundary between farms since early times. During the spring, Steinar's cattle grazed heavily on Stakmiri when they were driven out from Hafsleik. Thorstein's farmhands complained, but Steinar paid no heed to them, and there the matter rested for the first summer. The following spring, Steinar continued to graze his cattle there. Thorstein talked calmly to him about it and asked him to graze his cattle within the old boundaries. Steinar replied that cattle would always go wherever they pleased. He spoke quite forcefully on the matter, and they exchanged harsh words. Then Thorstein had the cattle driven back over the brook. When Steinar realized this, he sent his slave Grani to watch over the cattle at Staksmiri, and he stayed there every day. This was towards the end of summer, and all the pasture south of Hafsleik was completely grazed. One day, Thorstein went up onto a rock to take a look around, and seeing where Steinar's cattle were heading, he went out to the marsh. It was late in the day. He could see that the cattle had gone a long way up the tract between the hills. Thorstein ran out to the meadows, and when Granny saw this, he drove the cattle as hard as he could back to the milking pens. Thorstein went after them and met Granny at the gate to the farm. Thorstein killed him there, and the spot at the hayfield wall has been called Grannehild, Granny's Gate, ever since. Thorstein pulled down the wall to cover his body, then went back to Borg. The women found Granny lying there when they went out to the milking pens, and returned to the farmhouse to tell Steinar what had happened. Steinar buried him up in the hills, then appointed another slave, whose name is not mentioned, to go with the cattle. Thorstein pretended to ignore the grazing cattle for the rest of the summer. Early in the winter, Steinar went out to Snefellstrund and spent some time there. He saw a slave named Thrand there, a very large and strong man. Steinar offered a high price to buy the slave. His owner valued him at 3 marks of silver, which was twice the value of an ordinary slave. The deal was made, and he took Thrand home with him. When they returned home, Steinar said to Thrand, "It so happens that I want you to do some work for me, but all the jobs have been shared out already. I want to ask you to do a job which will not be very difficult for you. You will watch over my cattle. I think it is important that they are grazed well, and I want you to rely solely on your own judgment about where the best pasture is on the marsh. I'm a poor judge of character if you don't turn out to have the courage or strength to stand up to any of Thorstein's farmhands." Steinar gave Thrand a big axe, measuring almost 1 ell across the head of the blade and razor sharp. "From the look of you, I can't tell how highly you would think of the fact that Thorstein is a goatee. If the two of you met face to face," Steinar added. Thrand answered, "I don't owe Thorstein any loyalty, but I think I realize what the job is you're asking me to do. You don't reckon you have much to lose in me, but when Thorstein and I put our strength to the test, whichever of us wins will be a worthy victor." Then Thrand started tending the cattle. Although he had not been there long, Thrand realized where Steinar had sent his cattle, and he sat watching over them in Staksmiri. When Thorstein noticed this, he sent one of his farmhands to see Thrand and tell him where the boundary between his land and Steinar's lay. The farmhand met Thrand and gave him the message to keep his cattle on the other side, since they were on Thorstein Egilsson's side. "I don't care whose land they are on," said Thrand. "I will keep the cattle where I think the best pasture is." They parted, and the farmhand went home and told Thorstein what the slave had replied. Thorstein let the matter rest, and Thran started watching over the cattle day and night. One morning, Thorstein got up at sunrise and went over to the top of a rock. Seeing where Steinar's cattle were, he walked over to the marsh until he reached them. A wooded cliff overlooks Lake, and Thrand was sleeping barefoot on the top of it. Thorstein went up to the top of the cliff, carrying an axe, which is not very large, and no other weapon. He prodded Thrand with the shaft of the axe and ordered him to wake up. Thrand leapt to his feet, grabbed his axe with both hands, and raised it. He asked Thorstein what he wanted. Thorstein said, "I want to tell you that this is my land, and your pasture is on the other side of the brook. I'm not surprised you don't realize where the boundaries lie here." "I don't care whose land it is," Thrand replied. "I will let the cattle be where they prefer." "I'd rather be in charge of my own land than leave that to Steinar's slaves," said Thorstein. "You're more stupid than I thought, Thorstein, if you want to risk your honor by seeking a place to sleep for the night under my axe," said Thrand. "I'd guess I have twice your strength, and I don't lack courage either, and I'm better armed than you." Thorstein said, "That's a risk I'm prepared to take if you don't do anything about the cattle grazing. I trust there's as much difference between our fortunes as there is between our claims in this matter." Thran said, "Now you find out whether I'm scared of your threats, Thorstein." Then Thran sat down to tie his shoe, and Thorstein raised his axe high in the air and struck him on the neck, so that his head fell to his chest. Thorstein piled some rocks over his body to cover it up and went back home to Borg. That day Steinar's cattle were late coming back. When there seemed to be no hope left of them returning, Steinar took his horse and saddled it. He rode south to Borg, fully armed, and spoke to some people when he arrived. He asked about Thorstein, and was told he was indoors. Steinar told them he wanted Thorstein to come outside to attend to some business. When Thorstein heard this, he picked up his weapons and went to the door. Then he asked Steinar what he wanted. "Did you kill my slave Thrand?" Steinar asked. "That's right," said Thorstein. "You don't need to imagine that anyone else did." "I can see you're set on defending your land with a firm hand since you've killed 2 of my slaves," replied Steinar. "But I don't consider that much of a feat. If you're so determined to defend your land bravely, I can give you a much more worthy option. From now on, I won't rely on anyone else to look after my cattle, and you can rest assured that they will remain on your land both day and night." "It so happened that last summer I killed the slave you sent to graze the cattle on my land," said Thorstein. "Then I let you have all the pasture you wanted right up until winter. Now I have killed another of your slaves for the same reason I killed the first one. You can have all the pasture you want for the coming summer, but after that, if you graze your cattle on my land and send men to drive your cattle here, I will kill every single one of them who herds them, even if it is you yourself. I will go on doing this every summer for as long as you keep on grazing them there." Then Steinar rode back off to Brekka and on to Staffaholt shortly afterwards. A Godi called Einar lived there. Steinar asked for his support and offered to pay him for it. Einar said, "My support will make little difference to you unless other men of standing back you up in this matter." After that, Steinar rode up to Rikkedal to see Tungu Odd, asked him for support, and offered to pay him for it. Odd took the money and promised his support in helping Steinar to secure his rights against Thorstein. Then Steinar rode home. That spring, Odd and Einar went with Steinar to Borg to announce their summons, taking a large band of men with them. Steinar summoned Thorstein for killing his slaves and demanded a penalty of lesser outlawry for each of them, which was the punishment for killing a man's slaves unless compensation was paid before the 3rd sunrise. Double lesser outlawry was considered equal to full outlawry. Thorstein brought no counter-charges, but sent some men off to Ness shortly afterwards. They went to Grim at Mossfell and told him the news. Egil showed little interest, but asked secretly in detail about Thorstein's dealings with Steinar and about the men who had supported Steinar in the case. Then the messengers went back home, and Thorstein was pleased with their journey. Thorstein Egilson took a very large party to the spring assembly and arrived the night before everybody else. They pitched tents over their booths, and so did the thingmen who had booths there. When they had set everything up, Thorstein sent word to his supporters to build great walls for a booth, which he then covered with a much larger tent than all the others there. No men were in that booth. Steinar rode to the assembly with very many men. Tungu Odd was in charge of a large band of his own men, and Einar from Staffahold also brought a large party. They pitched their tents over their booths. It was a very well-attended assembly. When the cases were presented, Thorstein made no offer of a settlement on his own behalf, and told anyone who tried to arrange one that he would wait to hear the ruling, since he set little store by Steinar's charges of killing his slaves after all they had done to deserve it. Steinar made a great show about his case, claiming that his charges were valid and that he had ample support to win his rights, and was very aggressive about the whole matter. The same day all the men went to the assembly slope to plead against the charges before they went before the courts in the evening. Thorstein was there with his party. He had the most influence over the conduct of proceedings there, just as Egil had done when he was a Godi and chieftain. Both sides were fully armed. From the assembly a band of men were sent riding alongside the river Glufura, their shields glinting. They rode into the assembly led by a large man wearing a black cloak and gilded helmet, and carrying a shield decorated with gold by its side. In his hand he held a barbed spear with its socket embossed with gold, and he was girded with a sword. Egil Skallagrimsson had arrived with 80 men, all armed for battle. It was an elite band of men, for Egil had brought along the finest farmers' sons from the south side of Ness, those whom he considered most warlike. Egil rode with his party over to the booth where Thorstein had already pitched tents, which were standing empty. They dismounted from their horses. When Thorstein recognized his father, he went up to him with all his men and welcomed him warmly. Egil and his men had all the gear they had brought with them carried into the booths and drove the horses out to graze. Once this was done, Egil and Thorstein went up the assembly slope with all their men and sat down in their usual places. Then Egil stood up and said in a loud voice, "Is Onan Shoni here on the slope?" Onan said he was, "And I am pleased that you have come, Egil. It will make a great contribution towards solving this dispute." Egil asked, "Are you responsible for the charges your son Steinar has brought against my son Thorstein, and the forces he has gathered to have Thorstein declared an outlaw?" "Their quarrel is none of my doing," said Onund. "I have spent a lot of words telling Steinar to make a reconciliation with Thorstein, because I have always been reluctant to bring any dishonor upon your son Thorstein. The reason is our lifelong friendship, Egil, ever since we were brought up here together." "It will soon emerge," said Egil, "whether you are speaking earnest or empty words, although I consider the latter less likely. I remember the days when neither of us could have imagined that we would quarrel with each other, or need to restrain our sons from committing such folly as I hear is in the offing now. It seems advisable to me, for as long as we live and witness their dispute, that we should take charge of the matter ourselves and settle it, without letting Tungu Odd and Einar pit our sons against each other like horses at a fight. They can find a better way to earn their living than involving themselves in this." Onan stood up and said, "What you say is right, Egil. It is unfitting for us to attend an assembly where our sons are quarreling. We will never incur the shame of being so weak in character that we cannot reconcile them. Steinar, I want you to grant me charge of this case and allow me to pursue it as I please." "I don't know whether I want to drop my case," said Steinar, after seeking the support of great men. "I want to settle the matter immediately to Odd and Einar's satisfaction." Then Odd and Steinar conferred, and Odd said, "I will grant you the support I promised you, Steinar, to win your rights or a settlement that you are prepared to accept. It will be largely your responsibility if Egil rules on the matter." Then Onan said, "I don't want to leave the matter up to Odd's tongue to decide, for he has neither treated me well nor badly. But Egil has done many fine things for me. I trust him better than other people, and I will have my own way now. You will be better off not having to tackle all of us. I have made the decisions on our behalf until now, and that's the way it will stay." "You are very insistent about it, father," said Steinar, "but I expect we will regret it later." Then Steinar handed over the charge of the case to Onund, who was to prosecute or settle as the law stipulated. Once Onan had taken charge of the case, he went to see Thorstein and Egil. Onan said, "I will leave it up to you to rule and judge here, Egil. Just as you please, because I trust you most to decide on these matters of mine and all others." Then Onan and Thorstein shook hands and named witnesses, adding that Egil Skallagrimsson alone should rule on the case at that assembly as he saw fit, without reservations, and so the matter ended. Everyone went back to the booths. Thorstein had 3 oxen brought to Egil's booth and had them slaughtered to provide him with a feast at the assembly. When Tungu, Odd, and Steinar returned to their booths, Odd said, "You and your father have decided how your case will be concluded, Steinar. Now I am free of all obligations to grant you the support that I promised you, because we agreed that I should help you to pursue your case or bring it to a conclusion that you found favorable, however Egil's settlement turns out." Steinar told Odd he had supported him well and nobly, and that they would be closer friends than before. "I declare that you are free of all your earlier obligations to me," he said. And that evening the courts met, and nothing eventful is said to have happened then. Until next time, my friends.